All right, so when you hear auditor and new clients, what comes to mind? Probably a handshake, right? A quick signature, and then it's off to the races with the spreadsheets. But the reality is so much more intense. It's actually more like a high-stakes investigation. Think of the auditor as part detective, part risk assessor, and this is all before a single number even gets looked at.
So it kind of begs the question, right? Can an auditor just work with anyone who can write a check? And you might be surprised to hear that the answer is a hard no. Not even close. In fact, some of the most critical work an auditor does happens way before the audit officially kicks off. It's all about being incredibly selective and deciding who you're even going to get into business with. So, here's our game plan. We're going to walk through the auditor's playbook step by step. First, we'll look at what happens before the audit even begins. Then, the auditor's initial investigation. After that, how they set the ground rules, the super important engagement letter. And finally, what happens when things change midstream.
All right, first things first. Before an auditor even thinks about opening a single financial statement, their firm has a huge decision to make. See, taking on a new client, it's not just about getting paid. It's about entering into a serious professional partnership, and that means the firm's own reputation is on the line, every single time.
And that leads us right into the investigation phase. Seriously, the firm has to do some major homework on a potential client. This isn't just, good business sense. It's an absolute professional necessity. They're doing it to protect themselves from huge risks and, honestly, to help uphold the integrity of the whole financial system. They're basically playing detective before they ever sign a contract.
So what exactly are they digging for in this investigation? Well, it really boils down to 4 key things the firm has to ask itself. Number 1, competence. Do we actually have the skills and expertise for this specific industry? Number 2, independence. Are we completely free of any conflicts of interest here? 3, ability to serve. Do we have the people, the time, the resources to do this job right? And number 4, this is the big one, client integrity.
And I really want to hammer this last point home. Figuring out the integrity of the client's management team, that is without a doubt the most critical and the most difficult part of this whole process. I mean, everything else could look perfect on paper, but if you can't trust the people running the show, the whole audit is basically built on a house of cards.
Okay, so that's the big question, isn't it? How in the world do you investigate something as fuzzy as integrity? You can't just walk in and ask, hey, are you guys trustworthy? Of course not. But it turns out there's a very specific, professionally required way that auditors have to go about this.
And here's the secret sauce. One of the most powerful tools an auditor has is the requirement to talk to the previous auditor. The firm that just left. And this isn't about office gossip or anything like that. As long as the client gives permission, it's a mandatory professional step. And trust me, it can reveal so much.
This conversation isn't just a casual chat either. There's a checklist, and a great way to remember it is with the acronym RID. R is for reasons. Why is the client switching auditors? Did they get fired, or did they choose to leave? I is for integrity. Is there anything at all that would make you question the management's integrity? And D is for disagreements. Were there any big fights over how to account for things or how the audit should be done? Man, the answers to those 3 questions can paint a very vivid picture.
Okay, so let's imagine the investigation goes well. The firm feels good about the client. So what's next? Well, now it's time to set the ground rules. This is where the auditor formally establishes the absolute non-negotiables, the preconditions for a successful audit. It's basically them laying down the law and making sure the client is 100% clear on how this is all going to work.
And there are really 2 main ones here. First, the client's management has to be using an acceptable financial reporting framework. Think of this as the official rule book, like GAAP or IFRS. They have to be playing by the same rules as everyone else. Second, and this is just as crucial, management has to agree to their side of the bargain, their responsibilities. That means giving the auditor full, unrestricted access to records, to people, to everything. If those 2 things aren't in place, the audit just can't happen, period.
So once everyone agrees to those preconditions, it's time to get it all down in writing. And that brings us to the engagement letter. I love this analogy. It's kind of like the professional prenup of the auditing world. It's all about making sure expectations are crystal clear from the start, so there are no nasty surprises later on.
The main thing to know is that this is a formal written contract that lays out all the terms of the audit, and it's sent before any of the real work begins. The whole point is just to make sure that everybody,
The auditor and the client are on the exact same page about what the goals are, who's responsible for what, and exactly what's included in the scope of the work.
And you can see here what usually goes inside one of these letters. You've got your core components, the stuff that's pretty much always in there. That's things like the objective and the scope of the audit, a clear breakdown of the auditor's responsibilities and management's responsibilities, and what the final report is expected to look like. Then you've got additional clauses that might be added depending on the situation. This could be anything from fees and billing to arrangements for bringing in other experts, or even clauses that limit the auditor's liability.
Now you might be wondering, what if you have a long-term client? You've been working with them for 10 years. Do you really have to draw up a brand new letter every single year? Well, the short answer is, it depends.
So, while you might not need a totally new one every single year for a long-term client, there are definitely triggers that mean you absolutely have to issue a new one. Things like if it seems like the client is getting confused about the scope of the work, or if there's a big change in management or ownership, any huge shift in the client's business, or even just new legal or reporting rules. All of those are big flashing signs that say, hey, we need a new letter to make sure we're all still on the same page.
Okay, so the letter is signed, everyone's happy, and the audit is underway. But what happens if, in the middle of everything, the client comes to you and asks to change the deal? Maybe they say, hey, can we downgrade this from a full audit to just a simple review? This is a really tricky spot for an auditor to be in, and it brings us to our last big topic.
The first thing the auditor has to do is figure out why the client is asking for the change. Is it a justified request or is it a giant red flag? You know, a justified change could be a genuine misunderstanding. Maybe they really only needed a review, which is less intense than an audit, and just didn't realize it. But a red flag, that's when the client tries to limit what the auditor can look at. Like if they say, hey, you can't look at our inventory records, or if the whole request just smells like they're trying to hide something. There's just no way an auditor can agree to that.
And if the auditor decides they can't accept the change and the client won't back down, well, the playbook is very clear on what happens next. There are 2 final moves. Step 1, withdraw from the engagement immediately. Just walk away. And step 2, figure out if they're professionally or legally required to report the situation to the company's owners, the board of directors, or maybe even government regulators.
And this really gets to the heart of the matter, doesn't it? For an auditor, walking away from a client isn't a failure. It's not losing business. It's actually the ultimate defense of their integrity. It's a powerful statement that their professional principles are just not for sale. Period.
So that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. This whole process we've just looked at, it's intense, it's rigorous, and for a very good reason. Because it makes you think, in the world of finance, a world that is built entirely on trust and good information, what's the real cost of getting into a bad partnership?